Hello everybody, I'm the Mr. C and this is my One Wheel Crisis. So, I work with a company called Ayla's Happy Creations. Or more accurately, she works with me, as most of the stuff that I've talked her into making for me is not her normal bivouac. So I'll leave a link below so you can take a look for yourself. She's created the wraps for the Beast, and also the vinyl covers for the Beast's hood. She usually works with jewelry and custom tumblers. And I'm starting a geotagging giveaway. Now, for those who don't know, geotagging is the process of adding geographic coordinates to a media based on the location of a mobile device. Geotags can be applied to photos, videos, websites, text messages, QR codes, and can also include timestamps and other contextual information. I'll be placing items she's produced around Brandermill, and I'll leave a geotagging address for the object in the videos. First to find it wins it. Hang around to the end of the video to find the geotag. And if you get a chance, check out her items on her page. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Well, this is going to be a long one. I wish I could say I was sorry, but I'm really not. I know that generally its acceptable length of a YouTube video is around 7.5 minutes, so I understand that I'm shooting myself in the foot by A, limiting my audience, because some people just see those long view times and won't touch them, and B, absolutely killing my average view duration and impressions click-through rate. But sometimes you just have to spend the time to take the ride. And while I have your attention, please press all the buttons, like, subscribe, share, notifications. They help me out, both with my YouTube stats and my serotonin levels. Oh, and sharing the fact that I exist with others is a great way of helping out as well. Today we'll be riding around Harbour Pointe, and as usual, not much in the way of history. I can tell you that the first house was built in 1981, and that the median sale price is around $389,000. But other than that, I couldn't find much else in the way of history on the internet or in libraries. This video was shot over the course of several months. Now, due to inclement weather, technical difficulties, corrupt 3D files, and if I'm being completely honest with myself, a wee bit of laziness. And a whole lot of listening to that voice that tells you, you don't really want to go outside, do you? It's warm in here, and you have entertainment. And those corn pottage chips that you bought from the Tokyo market that you love so much? I can tell you from personal experience, don't listen to that guy. This was originally to be released on June 19th. Now, due to the corruption of the 3D file that was the second half of the ride, you'll notice that the last 10 minutes of the video were filmed in a different season than the first. And as this video was originally to be released on Father's Day, the entomology corner and the dad joke should make a little more sense and seem a little less.
From hell's heart, I stab at thee.
After this, there's only one more Brandermillians left to film. It'll cover the area around St. Ledger's Pool, basically from Tuttle Hill to Watkins Glen. I'll have to get permissions, and I really doubt they'll give them to me, but I want to film a lap around the Brandermill Woods retirement community. I've already made a few forays out to Wood Lake to check the place out, and the way the homes are set up and the fact that half of the streets are duds will make filming kind of interesting. Currently, only 41.9% of my viewers have actually subscribed to my channel. 41.9%. Remember, my channel needs your support. No, not that kind of support. Not that kind of support either, but let's not say that I'm against tax-deductible donations. I need you to subscribe to my channel, like my videos, and share me around to all of your friends. I am grateful for my 63 subscribers and look forward to the opportunity for them to mingle with new subscribers. As in other Brandermillian videos, there isn't much history to report on, so this time I've decided to take a look at John Mitchell Jr. John Mitchell Jr. was a prominent newspaper editor, politician, banker, and civil rights activist. He was born on July 11, 1863, on Laburnum Estates, located at the time in Henrico County, but later became a part of Richmond City. Both of Mitchell's parents, John and Rebecca Mitchell, were enslaved servants of James Lyon, a lawyer, legislator, a member of the Convention of 1850 to 1851, and a member of the House of Representatives of the Confederate States of America. After the Mitchells were emancipated at the end of the American Civil War, they remained at Laburnum. Because his mother had taught him to read, he was able to attend the private school of the Baptist minister Anthony Venga in the early 1870s, before attending the Navy Hill School. It was one of the first public schools to employ African American teachers. And in 1876, he started attending the Richmond Colored Normal School, a high school that specialized in training new African American teachers. Mitchell graduated in 1881 as valedictorian of his class and received a special award for his cartography work in the drawing of a map of Virginia. He began teaching at the Fredericksburg Colored School with fellow graduate Marietta Childs. Mitchell then returned to teach at the Valley School in Richmond in 1883. And in 1884, the newly appointed Democratic School Board fired all 11 African American teachers at the school. Mitchell started writing for the New York Globe in September of 1883. An African American lawyer by the name of Edwin Archer Randolph founded the Richmond Planet the same year. At the end of the first year, the newspaper was losing money and on the verge of collapse. It was Mitchell at the age of 21 that led a group of recently unemployed teachers who were able to rescue the paper. In the early years, Mitchell struggled financially as he edited and published the paper mostly out of his room in the boarding house. He replaced much of the press equipment and contributed his own artwork. He was able to increase the circulation to the point that the Planet eventually turned a profit. Mitchell purchased an electric printing press in 1888, and by 1904 the Planet had a weekly circulation of over 4,200 readers. The paper's headquarters were moved to the Swan Tavern on Broad Street, where the Library of Virginia now stands. The Richmond Planet gained national attention as a staunch advocate of racial justice and civil rights. He attracted the attention of such national figures as Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass. Mitchell became the president of the Afro-American Press Association in 1890, serving until September of 1984. The Richmond Planet was well known for Mitchell's anti-lynching efforts, which included in-depth coverage of lynching cases, lists of victims, and graphic images of lynchings. But in all reality, his civil rights efforts went well beyond his newspaper punditry. He prevented several lynchings, advocated on behalf of convicted African Americans by arranging for legal counsel, appealing to government officials, circulating petitions, and fundraising. And it wasn't always smooth sailing. After the lynching of Richard Walker in May of 1886, Mitchell wrote a scathing editorial which garnered a death threat. "If you poke that infernal head of yours in this county long enough for us to do it, we'll hang you higher than we hung him." He printed the letter in the Planet and added a quote from Julius Caesar. "There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats, for I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass by me as idle wind, which I respect not." He then hopped a train sporting twin Smith & Wesson revolvers. Once he arrived, he walked 5 miles from the train station to the scene of the lynching, and from there he toured the neighborhood, including the jail from which Mr. Walker was taken. He was famously noted as having said the cowardly letter writer was nowhere in evidence. Also, if you get a chance, look up the story of the 15-year-old Simon Walker. There's a good article in Style Weekly by Ann Field Alexander. I'll leave a link below. While Mitchell encouraged African Americans to defend themselves against the failures of the justice system, he also worked within the system to promote change by running for political office. And in 1888, he'd won election as a Republican to the Richmond Common Council, and 2 years later to the Board of Aldermen. He served until 1896, by which time gerrymandering and population shifts had made it almost impossible for any African American to win a majority vote in any portion of the city. Mitchell was an adept and an astute politician. Although he fought relentlessly to improve conditions for black Richmonders, he knew how to choose his battles. And in 1891, he secured $20,000 for the construction of new African American schools, and 3 years later, he helped persuade the city to provide enough funds to construct an armory for the 1st Battalion Virginia Volunteers, a black militia regiment in Jackson Ward. And in 1893, he voted with other council members to allot money for the reburial of Jefferson Davis in Hollywood Cemetery. When Mitchell ran for city council again in 1900, election fraud led to the defeat of all African American candidates. They challenged the results, but the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals ruled that they didn't have a leg to stand on. And around that same time, Virginians voted to call a new constitutional convention. 2 years later, they approved a new state constitution that disenfranchised most African American voters. Mitchell did not run for political office again after that until 1921. Previously, the Republican State Convention had excluded most African Americans as candidates. He was forced to run for governor on the Lily Black Republican ticket. It was a dismal failure. Mitchell remained focused on the Richmond Planet, but he began to focus more on his business endeavors in the wake of the disenfranchisement and all that was entailed by racial segregation. In the 1880s, he had joined the Grand United Order of True Reformers, a beneficial association established by William Washington Brown to provide life insurance for African Americans. Mitchell sat on the board of directors of the True Reformers Bank from 1889 to 1993, and in 1892, Mitchell joined the Knights of Pythias, an African American secret fraternal order, and became the Grand Chancellor of the Virginia Pythians in 1894. Mitchell spent much of his time traveling throughout Virginia recruiting members and establishing lodges. He was able to refine the insurance program offered by Virginia's Grand Lodge, and due to the organization's success, Mitchell was eventually able to establish the Mechanics Savings Bank, from which he received the charter in 1901. As the president of the bank, Mitchell became the member of the predominantly white American Bankers Association. Displeased by the disenfranchisement of most African American voters in 1902, Mitchell fought harder for justice and equality through both journalism and activism. He took on Jim Crow segregation, which had increased its grasp on Richmond in the early part of the 1900s. Mitchell had protested Jim Crow laws in his many travels through his disregard of Jim Crow signs wherever he went. In 1904, the state of Virginia authorized transit companies to start segregating streetcars. Mitchell turned his protests up to 11 and organized a boycott of the streetcars. In 1904, following Virginia Passenger and Power Company's implementation of segregation on Richmond streetcars, Mitchell, along with his fellow civil rights activist and entrepreneur Maggie Leno Walker, asked African Americans to stay off the streetcars. Those words began a 2-year boycott of Richmond's streetcar system. And in Richmond Planet, Mitchell opined the new Jim Crow streetcar service for Richmond is an innovation to which progressive independent colored people of this city will hardly care to submit. Walking is good. Let us walk. And alternately he wrote, if the entire colored population of this city, or at least 90% of it, would agree to make the sacrifice and walk for a year, the agony produced on the white man's nerve center, which is his pocket, would tend to cause an amelioration of our condition. Even though Virginia Passenger and Power Company went out of business later in 1904, the boycott was unsuccessful, as in 1906 the General Assembly passed a law that mandated segregation on public transportation. The boycott dwindled out in 1906, but Mitchell nonetheless continued to avoid riding segregated streetcars. Mitchell was a complex, multifaceted person whose varied interests included a fascination for the Stanley steamer, an automobile of the early 20th century that ran on steam produced by a vertical fire tube boiler. So, From the late 1910s through the early 1920s, Mitchell became noted for his travels, a column in the Planet dedicated to recounting the adventures he had in his Stanley Steiner automobile. In 1919, Mitchell and his bank suffered a series of economic setbacks as the post-World War I economy took a downward turn. He soon found himself in conflict with white bank regulators. His troubled relationship with the regulators, on top of his financial problems, caused the Mechanics Savings Bank to close in 1922. Mitchell was indicted on charges of fraud and theft after an accusation of misuse of bank money was leveled in December, and in April of 1923 was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Released on bail, he fought to have his conviction overturned, and on March 19, 1925, the Supreme Court of Appeals ruled in Mitchell's favor, and the state dropped the charges against him. Mitchell was left in a financial ruin, his home, the Planet headquarters, and other properties in the hands of bank receivers. Most were sold off, although he was allowed to reside in his home for the remainder of his life. Mitchell wasn't married and lived the later part of his life with a nephew. Despite all that he had achieved and all that he had given in his life, Mitchell died in poverty in his Richmond home at his desk on December 3, 1929. Family tradition describes Mitchell as ready to meet his death while wearing the Knights of Pythias uniform. "Life's great adventure is over," began the Richmond Planet's editorial tribute by one of Mitchell's colleagues. "It rained and the winds blew as the spirit of the strong man which had weathered innumerable storms drifted out into the dark and unknown sea which rolls around all the world. His great intellect, his indomitable will, his unconquerable spirit, and matchless courage rest at last with the ashes of this restless man. 'Tis Richmond, but living Richmond no more." Although Mitchell had established Woodland Cemetery in 1917, he was buried next to his mother in the Evergreen Cemetery. The grave at the Evergreen Cemetery is marked and reads, "Editor, banker, alderman, and pioneer of civil rights, a man who would walk into the jaws of death to serve his race." The marker goes on to quote Isaiah 55:4, "Behold, I have given him for a witness to the people, a leader and a commander to the people." Mitchell's sudden death marked the end of an era for the Richmond Planet. No longer would Richmonders read that Mitchell's crusading ways, political life, or doomed business ventures. Throughout the rest of December of 1929 and into January of 1930, the Planet carried letters of condolences, obituaries, and eulogies in place of the usual editorial column. The passing of Mitchell by no means meant the end of the Richmond Planet. He was succeeded as editor by his nephew Roscoe C. Mitchell. Following a general reorganization of the paper, M.A. Norrell became the editor in 1931. The Planet continued to be the forefront of issues concerning African Americans as well as the Richmond community. This changed in 1938. In May of that year, Richmond Planet was bought by the Afro-American of Baltimore, Maryland, one of the most prominent African-American newspapers in the country. On May 28, 1938, the editors of the Planet paid a final homage to the founders of their paper, its illustrious history, and to John Mitchell, Jr. as they published the farewell edition. On June 4th of 1938, the first edition of the Afro-American and the Richmond Planet was distributed in Richmond. While the paper carried the name of the Planet and reported Richmond and other Virginia news, it was very obviously part of the Afro-American line of newspapers. Over the decades, the paper would undergo several incarnations. From 1938 to 1939, it was the Afro-American and the Richmond Planet. In 1939, it was briefly the Richmond Afro-American and the Richmond Planet. And then from 1939 to 1941, just the Richmond Afro-American. And then from 1941 until 1996, back to the Richmond Afro-American, the Richmond Planet. The Richmond Afro-American, the Richmond Planet, ceased publication in 1996, ironically in the middle of Black History Month on February 13, 1996. The longest-running weekly black newspaper in America died, and the legacy of Mitchell's Richmond Planet came to an end. To date, thousands of pages from 1889 to 1910 of the Richmond Planet have been made available online at Chronicling America, and well over 300,000 pages of Virginia in-print newspapers, which make up the Newspaper Project and the library's contribution to the National Digital Newspaper Program. Did you know there were more than 70 million fathers in the U.S. alone? The nation's first Father's Day was celebrated on June 19th in 1910 in the state of Washington. However, it was not until 1972 that Father's Day became a nationwide holiday in the U.S. Father's Day in 2022 was on Sunday, June 19th. Mother's Day has its origins in the peace and reconciliation campaigns of the post-Civil War era. During the 1860s, Anne Reeves Jarvis brought one divided West Virginia town together to celebrate Mothers' Work Days that brought together the mothers of Confederate and Union soldiers. However, Mother's Day did not become a commercial holiday until 1908, when inspired by Jarvis's daughter, Anna Jarvis, who wanted to honor her own mother by making Mother's Day a national holiday. Then the John Wanamaker department store in Philadelphia sponsored a service dedicated to mothers in its auditorium. And thanks in large part to an association with retailers who saw great potential for profit in the holiday, Mother's Day caught on right away. And in 1909, 45 states observed the day, and in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson approved a resolution and made the second Sunday in May a holiday in honor of the mothers. Now, the campaign to celebrate the nation's fathers did not meet with the same enthusiasm, perhaps, as it was said, because fathers do not have the same sentimental appeal that mothers have. And on July 5th in 1908, a West Virginia church sponsored a sermon in honor of fathers, a Sunday sermon in memory of 362 men who had died in previous December's explosions at the Fairmont Coal Company mines. The next year, a Spokane, Washington woman named Sonora Smart Dodd, one of 6 children raised by a widower, tried to establish an official equivalent to Mother's Day for the male parents. She went to local churches, the YMCA, shopkeepers, and government officials to drum up support for her idea, and she was successful, as Washington State celebrated the nation's first statewide Father's Day on June 19, 1910. Slowly, the holiday spread. My dad used to carry around an old knotted string in his pocket. Then, anytime someone asked him something where the answer was no, he would just pull it out and say, "Afraid not," and would just laugh himself silly. Usually he did it by himself. You can almost always tell it's Father's Day, as the kids suddenly are very interested in garage sales. Never wanted to believe my dad was stealing from his job as a road worker, but when I got home, all the signs were there. So, the geotagging giveaway for this video is... you can locate it at... or, for my more advanced users, all I ask is that if you find it, please leave a post to let us know. Well, that's all of it. We've come to the end of another eventful ride. And as always, thanks for spending the time and taking the ride. And a special thanks to my 63 subscribers, without whom I would have no subscribers. And remember, the best way to help support myself and my channel is by liking, subscribing, and letting everyone else in the world that you know that I exist.